Hallmarks, Maker's Marks, Colors and Motifs in Part 1. And if you haven't seen that video, it's on my channel and it really helps tie this all together. In this video, we're going to be doing the construction and materials of the brooches. So you may wonder what I mean by construction and materials. And what I mean is the way they're built and what raw materials are used to make them. So we'll be looking at the findings, which is like the clasp and the hinges, and also like the filigree work that are on some of them. So this is like the construction, and the materials is the raw materials that's being used. So what type of metal is being used at certain times, and what type of stones, because before in the Victorian, even in Art Deco, most of the stones were semi-precious or precious stones, and most of the material was gold and sterling, or at least gold filled. And now we're coming into the time where the stones are rhinestones, plastic is becoming really big, molded plastic, bakelite, and lots of different glass is being used to make wonderful different cabochons and stones. And also the metal has changed a whole lot to pot metal and white metals, base metals, copper, and even the ones that are fully made of plastic or wood. So that's what we're going to get into in this video. So we're going to be looking at construction, and the first thing is I made like this cheat sheet so you can see the main components that were used in the construction of brooches during these specific time periods right here. Just as a bit of a refresher, I'm showing a couple of the Victorian brooches. You can see the hinge, the tube hinges here that are handmade and individually put on like each component. And it has the open C clasp. As you can see, the pins are usually longer. And I just wanted to remind everybody about the construction since it is on the cheat sheet. But if you haven't seen, I have a whole video over identifying Victorian pieces. But just to show this again before we get back into the 30s. So here's some late 30s, early 40s brooches. You can see this one butterfly is quite yellowed from the glue over time. But we're going to see a lot of the same construction during the 30s and 40s. It didn't change a whole lot. They usually all have like fairly smooth backs because they were hand worked and hand finished, and the clasp and hinges are about the same as well. These are 40s and 50s pieces, and I'm showing the backs of each one of these too, so you can see that the the late 30s and early 40s pieces, they're very similar. All smooth. This is a very nice brand name, Trifari, so it's going to look better. And as you can see, these are hand worked, and the solder on that one is terrible. But you can see how it's all very smooth. There's no texture. And then here, this one, you can see the texture, but that's because the metal was kind of formed around it, crimped. This one's a little dirty, however, it still has a smooth back. Here's some great mid to late 50s pieces. If you don't love this poodle, I don't know what to say. But the back, you can see, is not smooth like with that mirror finish anymore. It has a texture to it. This is because they started using like spin casts, and they were using a whole lot more molds where they didn't have to hand finish the backs. They might have still used the construction and little rivets and stuff, but you can see that there's texture and mold lines. And that's the big difference between the late 50s and the 40s and 30s. Here's a side-by-side comparison to show you the mirror finish and the texture. There's lots of different types of construction, but these are some of the more prevalent ones in vintage brooches. So first on the list is swedge, which just means riveting metal components together. And as you can see from these photos, there was a lot of willow branch looking settings that were occurring, and the rivets were attached to the metal settings. And also it was really big, like atomic age, for like those big round atomic looking explosions, starburst, space age, brooches. It didn't occur a whole lot before or a whole lot after. It's more of a little bit more labor intensive process. So it was really just a 50s and 60s sort of trend, although it can still be seen today. So there's nothing new about filigree work. It's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. Beautiful Art Deco pieces, vintage and antique, especially in China, there was a whole lot of it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're looking at these thin sheets of metal with like cutout pieces that are called filigree for our intents and purposes, because it is. It's just not that tiny intricate work that was used on antique pieces. It was really, really big with Miriam Haskell and West Germany pieces. We see it on that a whole lot. So this type of filigree work was late 30s and is still being used today. However, the ones used today is a lot thinner, cheaper like material, as the vintage ones were thicker with a nice imprint on it, and you can see that pretty easy with these pieces. So now we're going to talk about figure eight pulling or puddling, which was a soldering technique. And as you can see, in between the round rhinestone settings, when they were soldered together, there was this figure eight that was created. And it's exclusively from D&E Juliana jewelry and was never able to be counterfeited by other people making it. So here's a side-by-side comparison of two pieces, one Juliana, one not. Here you can see the thick puddling, the figure eight on this Cha-Cha Juliana brooch. And you can see it's kind of like floating on the top of those little cups. And it's very easy to see once you get used to looking at it. And on this silver piece, we can see there's lots of little round settings there that are soldered together. However, there's just a thin little line, and there's puddling at the end, but that's not figure eight puddling. We can tell. And then also, when you put it up to the side like this, you can kind of see each individual cup like at the back. And when we put this one up, you can see that the figure eight is almost like floating on the top. Next is the hook and eye construction that puts two layers together instead of using rivets. This is commonly used on Shriner pieces, and a lot of people see that. And there's a little hook on one spot that goes through the eye on the bottom. So it's very good to identify Shriner pieces. However, it's used in Austrian pieces and other pieces as well. Lastly is the riveting. You see the rivets in here, and it's not a swedge construction because it's not held together by the rivets. As you can see, the rivets are just putting the rhinestones onto the piece. So this would be a riveted piece. Here's a little closer look at the swedge construction, and as you can see, there's round rivets that are holding on to the metal rhinestone settings in there, and it's holding the whole piece together, and that's what makes it a swedge construction. Here's one of the atomic age 50s pieces, and you can see the rivets in there, but I just wanted to show this one too to show you that these are layered, and the centerpiece has riveted them together. So here's a 1950s piece with some pretty stones in it, and as you can see, it has a filigree backing on it. And what's neat about filigree backings that I didn't mention earlier are they were
really kind of used to cover up more unsightly construction components such as swedge. So here we have a swedge brooch with the filigree back that most filigree backings had swedge construction underneath it. So it's like a cover-up. So now we come to the clasps, and a lot of these are still available today, but are used more in the artisan world and not in the mass production. This is the V-bar or V-backs. We see these a lot in the 1950s. It's a solid one piece in the shape of a V, usually with just a hole in the middle where it can be riveted on to the brooch. Mainly used predominantly in the 50s and 60s. This is a curved bar. It's like a shape of a smiley face. It's not like with the point. So a lot of people still call these V-backs. This is a mass-produced one that's still available to buy. But as you can see, this one's curved and not pointed straight down. Here's the straight back ones that it's one solid piece with the hinge and clasp all together on it. And on these vintage pieces, they're usually riveted on or maybe use little screws or nails in them. And these are the ones that are still available today, used in the artisan world. And most of the time, in the modern ones, they're glued on. Here's an example of it being glued on, but you can see the difference. This is a Bakelite piece from the 30s, but it even has like a C-clasp, not a safety. Here's one with just the center rivet on there. So here are the molded and soldered pieces. As you can see, this piece was, the hinge was placed and the clasp was placed in the design, so it wasn't soldered on. And then on this piece, the clasp and the hinge were individually soldered on. And then on this Coro piece, they were individually soldered onto a backing, and then that backing was riveted onto the piece. The one used most today is this one, where it's got like a textured back, and the clasp and the hinge were both made into the mold.